Hello. Good morning. This is Kathy. Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with our meeting. The time is 9:32. My name is Zelma DeLeon. I'm the Executive Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships at the University of North Texas, and I'm also the Chair of the committee. I would like to welcome you today to our meeting and to those also listening on the phone. We're going to start with introductions. We do have a new member on the committee today. He is one of our student representatives. His name is Jonathan Sedetis. He is from the University of Texas at El Paso, so welcome. We're happy to have you here. We also have a visitor in our audience. She is going to be our second representative. Her name is Marilyn Abedrabo. Got it? Okay. And she's from Collin County Community College, and she will be joining us in September. I think we're going to go ahead and start with introductions. So I'm going to start over here with Terry. If you can introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
Terry Shinneman. Where am I? I'm in Austin, Texas. No, actually, I'm Houston. Coordinator of College and Career Readiness at Fort Bend ISD.
Good morning. I'm Christopher Murray. I'm the Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships at Texas State University, and I'm also the President of the Texas Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators.
Let's see. Sorry. Hello, my name is Jonathan Sedesetis. I'm a student. I'm a double major in political science and Chicano studies from the University of Texas at El Paso.
I'm Robert Marino, and the Dean of Financial Aid at San Jacinto College.
I'm Chad Pulse. I'm Deputy Assistant Commissioner here at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board.
Delisa Fox, Assistant Vice President, Scholarships and Financial Aid, Texas A&M University.
Samantha Stoniker, District Director of Student Financial Aid Services at Tarrant County College.
Carla Flores, Senior Associate Director at the Financial Aid Office at UTRGV.
Christine Stewart Carruthers, Vice President Enrollment Services for the Texas State Technical College System.
Sandy Jones, Associate Director of Financial Aid at McLennan Community College in Waco.
Alan Pixley, Director of Financial Aid and Veteran Services at Collin College.
Brent Williford, Dean of Financial Aid Scholarships, Blinn College.
Jeannie Gage, Director of Financial Aid Scholarships and Veteran Services, Texas A&M Corpus Christi.
Bridget Jans, Executive Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid at the University of Houston.
Jenna Cullinane Hagee, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding here at the Coordinating Board.
And I believe we have someone on the phone.
Hi, yes, this is Kathy Sanchez, Assistant Director at University of North Texas Health Science Center.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before we start the meeting, I'm going to just have a few reminders for all of you. If you're going to speak, be sure and use your mic, press the button. If you have cell phones, please put them on silent. If you need to get up, and you're welcome to step out if you need to at any time. And then we'll determine later if we are going to break for lunch. Okay, in front of you, you have the agenda, and you also have the minutes from the March meeting. That is the first item on the agenda, well, agenda item B. If you can please review the minutes at this time, if you haven't already reviewed them previously, and let me know if you have any recommendations or edits. Any questions or any recommendations or edits? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for March 8th?
So moved.
Okay, Christine?
Second.
Second, Robert, all in favor? Aye, okay. So no one's opposed. So motion carries that the minutes are approved for the March meeting. Thank you. Okay, our next agenda item is update prior FAAC business. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chad.
Thank you very much. For those of you who I didn't get to say hi to this morning, just letting you know that I got on a plane in Charleston and I was fine, and by the time I landed in Austin yesterday, I was sick. So I am here to give you information, and then I will be going home to my bed. So my apologies if I am not as energetic as I usually am for these meetings. I also wanted to apologize if anyone had trouble getting to the materials today. Wanda Carr, who many of you know, who has helped with these meetings for the past 3 years, retired on May 31st, and she was awesome and got everything put together before she left. And then the agency changed their website on June 1st. And neither of us put two and two together to realize that all the links we sent weren't going to work anymore. So very sorry about that. We'll do better next time. In terms of prior business, I reviewed the past minutes to identify any items that still had activities going on. One item that I did want to update you on is negotiated rulemaking. The Texas Grant, TEOG, and TEG committees all reached consensus on language that would provide institutions with more flexibility in the use of their funding. The language has been posted in the Texas Register for a 30-day comment period that ends June 17th. In summary, the language eliminates reallocations. It allows institutions until August 1st to be able to utilize the funding that they receive in their allocations. It provides any adjustments to the allocation much earlier in the academic year, in October as opposed to in March, so that institutions can address student needs more effectively. It equitably distributes excess funding across all the institutions early in the academic year, rather than focusing on those institutions making requests late in the year. It provides a preliminary step toward institutions being able to provide summer grants. We're still working on some of the rule changes that'll be necessary for that. And then TEG, the TEG and TEOG committees also chose to move to receiving allocations for both years of the biennium at the start of the biennium. So the two-year institutions and the private institutions will get both of their allocations probably in July, right after the General Appropriations Act is signed in June. So all of that is posted in the Texas Register. Again, all the committees reached consensus, and so we will review any comments that come in by June 17th, and then we will be presenting this to our board's Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning at the June meeting later this month. Does anyone have any questions about the negotiated rulemaking process that occurred? Okay. A couple other items that have been on our prior agendas that are kind of still in progress. One is the student loan letter, SB 887. Ginger Gossman is away today, but there are a couple things that she asked that I share with you. Indiana University, which is, well, probably not the first creator of a student loan letter, is probably the most publicized creator of a student loan letter. They shared their experiences through a webinar earlier this week, and this first webinar focused on kind of technical questions about the loan letter requirement. And Ginger and her group are in the midst of planning a second webinar that is going to be focused more on sharing best practice as to how information is communicated, how to reach students effectively, how to word things in ways that will be heard, things like that. So more information on that. I was unfortunately flying to Charleston when that webinar occurred, so I didn't get a chance to see it. Did any of you all have an opportunity to participate? Was it worthwhile? Was it helpful?
It was very helpful, yes.
Good. I will make sure that Ginger gets that feedback. So look for more information on another webinar that will be coming soon. Zelma already mentioned that we do now have a nomination from the two-year sector. We hadn't received any nominations during the original process, but Marilyn Abedrabo is from Collin Community College, and she will be recommended for approval by the board at the July meeting, after which she can be official and move from the far table up to the main tables, and we have a name tag and everything. And so we're lucky. I was very pleased that she was able to come today and kind of hear what we do so that she can hit the ground running when she joins us in September. So, and then final prior business item is going to be addressed later in the meeting. Agenda item E is going to talk about the potential legislative ideas that were created by the legislative subcommittee that we had. So they finalized their recommendations, and our external relations area has looked at those and is going to be able to speak to kind of how they do and don't fit in with the agency's plans. So, was there any prior business that someone was hoping I was going to cover that I didn't cover?
I just had a question, Chad.
Yeah, sure.
If our allocation is going to be for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no reallocation,
Correct.
what happens if someone doesn't spend money the first year of that? Will
In the
those
first-
allocations go up?
If institutions don't utilize their full funding in the first year, they actually get to hold on to that funding for the second year. They still have to utilize, they have to kind of stop awarding it August 1st for us to figure out how much is being carried forward. But any money that's not utilized in the first year, you can utilize in the second year. Any money that's not utilized in the second year reverts to the agency, and effectively what will occur is all of that money will be equitably distributed out across all institutions as opposed to having a request reallocation process. So really the first year of the allocation for all three of the programs, you know, that money is yours to use. If you don't use it in the first year, you can use it in the second year.
And that would start with next year, not this year?
With this year, meaning this year right now, FY18, then...
Or 2021, I guess it would be.
Right. It starts with 2021. The ending of the reallocations was actually effective immediately, or will be effective immediately if everything goes through and all gets approved. And so that rule would be effective in August. And so the FY18 allocations that were just done a couple months ago, those will be the last reallocations that ever occurred. And so for FY19, the money that you receive, you will have all the way until August 1st of 2019 to spend your funds instead of having to spend them by February 20th. So you'll have all that money, and then anything that's left will revert to the agency, and we will effectively redistribute it out across the institutions. So as of now, or as of August, when hopefully all of these rules pass, the whole need to figure it out by February 20th goes away. And you have until August 1st to utilize your Texas grant, your TEOG, or your TEG. We did not do negotiated rulemaking on the other programs, so whatever rules are in place on those programs continue.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chad?
And I should say that my illness has failed to allow me to express how excited we are, because we are really excited about this change, and we're really excited that the institutions, all the institutions on the committees, were very excited about the additional flexibility, the additional time that they're going to have to be able to spend the funding, the ability to carry forward from one year to the other, and then once we're able to work through the details of summer grants, the opportunity to be able to do that. So sorry, my cold is preventing that excitement from coming through.
Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item C. No, I'm sorry, that was C. So now it's agenda item D. Our next agenda item is a presentation. Data highlight on student debt data in relation to student debt goal from the strategic plan. You have the presentation handouts in front of you. The presenter is Jenna Cullinane Heggie. She is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning, and we're excited to have you join us today. Welcome, and we're ready to hear your presentation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the student debt goal that's part of the 60 by 30 Tech strategic plan and some of the indicators that we track related to that, and also provide you some detail that we also have in our accountability system and our almanac. So some of what I'm going to share with you today is easily accessible in lots of places, and want to make sure you kind of know where those are and can track some of this on an ongoing basis as well. So as you likely... All right. Is that better? Yeah? Okay. As you likely know well, the fourth goal of the 60 by 30 text plan focuses directly on student debt, and this is a major priority, obviously, for the agency and for the state. And the way we think about this is that we want to limit student debt so that it doesn't exceed 60% of a first-year wage for our Texas public graduates. So that means we need to know a little something about the debt load, and we need to know a little something about the wages, because we think that when we think of the word manageable debt, it means not only sort of the level, but we need to know the context of how much earning power you have on the other end of that investment you've made in higher education. So both pieces are really important. And when you think of all the debt and divide it by the amount of wage in that first year, we see 60% is kind of a maintenance goal throughout the course of the strategic plan, which ends in 2030. And we'd like to emphasize that it not exceed 60%. That's been a level where we've been for the last several years. And nationally, we see lots of indicators of growing student debt, and want to make sure that we're not seeing large increases in that amount. So like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about all three parts, just the debt side of the equation, the wage side of the equation, and when we put those two things together and divide debt by wage and look at it as a percentage. So first on the debt side, what we see is when we break this out by kind of level of credential, that bachelor's recipients have about twice as much debt as those earning an associate's or certificate. So this isn't surprising. We'd expect to see more students are taking out loans. Students are in higher education longer if you're going for a bachelor's degree. Tuition and fees are higher at universities. So those differences are understandable and predictable. So see about 60% of bachelor's students have debt, and then their average loan amount is about $30,000, about $16,000 and $14,000 respectively for associates and certificate holders. These are our 2017 numbers. This is that same, let me just be really clear here. So this is not the overall debt as a percent of wage. We're going to get to that at the very end. That's what we're tracking for 60 by 30 text. Right now, we're just looking at the percentage of completers with debt. So just on that first piece around debt. So this is that same information I showed on the last slide about the percent of students with some debt. And this is just the longitudinal look at it. So over time, so you'll see that 60%, 34%, 27% there for the 2017 numbers. And what you can see for our bachelor's percentage, it stayed fairly consistent over the last 10 years. We have seen a little spike up for our associate and certificate completers with debt in kind of the middle of that range, and that's kind of post-recession. We had a lot of big enrollment spikes in our two-year sector around that time. So we would expect that both during post-recession, maybe students who might not have come in previously came into higher education. Also, salaries were probably dampened during that period of time, so we saw higher debt levels.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So this is within the state of Texas, is that correct?
Texas only, yes.
Okay, and the bachelor's degree, is that only the student's debt? Is a plus loan debt in this?
So we include federal and state loans, we include Parent Plus loans, and then we get a large proportion of the private loans reported as well.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yep. Thank you for that clarification. So on the next slide, what we've done is broken out that same information about percentage of students with loans and then their average loan amount by age group to look at some of the variation here. So we're first looking at public universities. And what you see, if we're just looking at the blue bars, these are the percent of students with loans. You see that younger students tend to have lower percentages. Those who are a little bit older, more likely to be independent, take out higher percentage of those students are taking out loans. And then actually the amount of loan is fairly consistent across around 30,000, 31,000 across each age group. When we look at the two-year sector, we still see that same pattern of younger students having lower levels or lower percentage of those students taking out loans, but also lower overall levels of loan, about 11,000 if you're looking at the orange bar there for the youngest group of under 24. And you see that that ticks up as age increases in the two-year sector. It's kind of a different pattern there. So next, again, still just on the debt side, we do see real differences by race and ethnicity. Here you can see African American, white, and Hispanic. And you can see that African American students have the highest proportion of students who are taking out debt, and also the highest average loan amount at $31,000. So white students about $29,000 and Hispanic about $24,000. So these are all undergrads, both looking at bachelor's, associates, and certificate completers. I want to point out that there's been some new research over the last couple of years really focused on debt levels among African Americans. This follows a national trend that we see much higher loan amounts and percent of students who are African American who are taking out loans. And so this is something that both at the time of completion we see these trends, and then actually some more recent studies have shown that the difference continues even after completion because of interest rates, because of going to graduate school, often for-profit graduate school, that debt levels continue to increase. And so a new study was showing that about 4 years after undergraduate completion, African Americans have about $25,000 more debt than white students who are matched and at peer level. So that's something that I think we really want to keep an eye on, especially as we think of our completion goal under 60 by 30 text. We're focused on completions overall, but with a specific target around African American completion, Hispanic completion, male completion, and economically disadvantaged student completion. So have that kind of in the background of your mind as you look at some of these numbers. So now this is the same chart on the next slide here, but just adding male and female. And what you can see is that females, a higher percentage of females are taking out debt. But what you'll see is the average loan amount is very consistent across these two groups. And this reminded me of another new study, actually maybe not quite so new, 2013, a big NIH study that looked at gender differences in debt and how it affects success in college. And what they saw here, a nationally representative study, is that the same phenomenon of almost very, very similar levels of debt, but that females are more likely to invest. And some of what they invest in higher education and take out loans in this way. And so, but this is also linked to that men and women seem to have a different threshold for dropout. So the more debt you get, the more likely you are to drop out at some point, but that men tend to drop out at lower levels of debt than females. So females will accumulate slightly more debt. And they attribute this to different economic opportunities, that there are more viable living wage opportunities economically for men than women who don't ultimately complete a credential. So as I mentioned before, male completion is one of our targets under the plan for completion. And so we're starting to examine this connection between student debt and completion for different males and females. So far we've only been looking at the levels of debt associated with completers. This slide is getting at looking at all people who started. This is our fall 2010 cohort, and looking at those who complete and don't complete. So maybe not surprisingly, our non-completers, only 35% of them have debt, so lower than the 53% we see among our completers. They don't stay in as long. They haven't been around 4, 5, 6 years in order to complete a credential, so just kind of lower opportunity to take out debt often. And then also their average loan amount is lower. But these students have the additional challenge of they haven't had the earnings boost associated with the completion. So these are also a group we really want to be thinking about and considering. And then finally, this slide breaks out the levels of debt. So among those who we also find working, so this is building towards that ultimate calculation I'm getting to, a debt as a percentage of wage. So, but this is just looking at the debt side. When you break it out by how much students borrow, there are higher levels, much higher levels for professional degrees, doctoral degrees, et cetera. So the more time you spend in, the higher your loan amounts. So this is a little bit more detailed from where I started. So now flipping over to the wage side, also expect that wages tend to be higher when you have those graduate degrees. So those are going to kind of balance out in some ways when we think about our manageable debt level. So on the wage side, first-year wages when someone completes a master's degree, about $64,000 compared to about $42,000 for bachelors, $33,000 and $36,000 respectively for associates and certificate completers. This slide is showing two things. So if you look at the blue, these are bachelor's graduates with their earnings 1 year after completion. And you can see at the top, biological sciences running all the way down to engineering at the bottom. And those are ordered by the level of first year wages from lowest to highest. And there are some pretty dramatic differences based on field of study. So just as one example, that engineering and business graduates are almost twice as much as the biological sciences and communication graduates. So big impacts post completion, depending on what kind of program you're in. And then in the orange, showing again percentage of loans. So there is some variation here, not quite as much variation, but I actually don't have as much of an explanation for the variation we see in terms of taking out loans by program of study. So that may be something someone here may have some insights on, but notable, I think. So now we're going to put both the debt side together with the wage side. And so this is what we're actually tracking under 60 by 30 text for the fourth goal. And so one thing I want to emphasize is that this is a statewide average. We know that universities are going to be higher. We know that tier institutions are going to be lower, but we're going to put everybody in the bucket together and come up with that average around 60%. We are only looking at people who are completers, who have debt and have a wage. So we're using the Texas Workforce Commission unemployment insurance wage records, and we have to have data in all of those areas in order to make this calculation work. And what we do is for each individual student, we look at debt as a percentage of wage to get that percentage, and then we line all those up, and we are looking for the median and what that level is. We use the median because we want to avoid sort of high extremes, usually on the high end. So you may have a very high wage. Someone who goes out and plays professional basketball is going to have a very different wage than you would expect for most graduates. And also on the debt side, you can have these very extreme levels of debt. And so we want to look kind of at the normal experience for our students in Texas. And so what you can see here, just to wrap your mind around this a little bit conceptually, if you're thinking about debt as a percentage of wage, and we just do kind of an expository example here, think about if three different students had $40,000, or were making $40,000 after they completed their credential. And so you would be on the low end, let's say 25% debt as a percentage of wage if your loan amount was $10,000 relative to $40,000 earnings. You would be at that median 60% as an individual student if you had $24,000 in debt relative to that $40,000 wage. And you would be kind of above that if, let's say, as an example, 125% if you had $50,000 in student debt relative to your first year wage of $40,000. So we line all these students up then and then identify that median. And that's what you'll see on this slide. So what you'll notice is that this is not a bell curve, right? So where we are for our median this year is 58.9%, so we're under that 60% threshold that we're tracking. But what we see is there's clustering kind of on the low end. So they're the same number of students on each side of that line, but more clustering around 25% of debt as a percentage of wage. But then we see this long tail for higher levels of debt as a percentage of wage out on the right-hand side. So this is now debt as a percentage of wage, and again, we're at that 58.9% statewide, and that averages out sort of the higher level for bachelors, 71.4, and the lower levels, 42 and 32% for associates and certificate holders. And the next slide is looking at debt to first year wage, and again, that variation by discipline. And you can see in the orange, those are bachelor's completers, and in the blue, associate completers. So almost uniformly, associate completers tend to be lower. You do see for the physical sciences, they're a bit higher, but typically lower than the bachelor's completers. You'll see some higher levels for bachelor's completers, psychology, communications, and biological sciences there at the bachelor's level. So in some cases, we may see things like for psychology, maybe people were going into graduate school, so they're continuing their education, so they're not making a lot of money. They do have a wage of some kind, but maybe that's a part-time or that's a TA or that's something else. So those are some of the factors that are not obvious here, but kind of bear mentioning that there are going to be differences in terms of are people going directly into the workforce? Do they need additional education to move into careers? And then finally, these are the breakouts, debt as a percentage of wage. We again see, even when we're thinking of both the debt side of the equation and the wage side of the equation, we see that African Americans have the highest levels of debt as a percentage of wage, both at the 4-year and the 2-year breakouts here. And then, so they're on the high end, and that's one reason we want to keep an eye on and continue to study that. But then if you look on the right-hand side, we see males are lower in both 2-year and 4-year completions here, and as their debt as a percentage of wage. And that's something also want to think about is as we have too few men coming into higher education and too few succeeding, how does kind of investment from a financial aid and loan perspective maybe play into this? So one thing I wanted to do also is to make sure that you took a look at a couple of the handouts that I provided. These are from our almanac. So our 2018 almanac is hot off the presses, and if you haven't seen the latest numbers, so some of these things I've covered in the presentation, but there are a few more items that you might be interested in. So on the first sheet, student debt profile, what you can see, in addition to some of the information I talked about, is about percentage of completers with debt, and then looking at both completers and not completers, is in the middle there you'll see the bar graph with blue bars and some of the pink dots. And this just breaks it out by institution. So if you're curious about your own institution, you can find some of that information there. And then as well, deeper in the almanac, there are profiles for every institution, so you can find more information. I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a moment. Towards the bottom, you can see the race ethnicity breakouts. And then the last of these, I also have a slide about, is excess semester credit hours. So this is the piece of the student debt goal. So student debt goal, 60% debt is percentage first year wage. We also track 2 targets under it. One is the percent of students taking out loans, which we've talked a lot about. But the third, or the second target, third piece of the student debt goal is related to excess hours. And that hints at that students and institutions play a role in some of the decision making around how much debt is accumulated. So if students are taking many excess hours, or they're staying around a long time, they may be taking out debt that they don't actually need, and we can improve the efficiency of both on the institutional side and supporting students to make good decisions about their course consumption. So we have seen we're aiming ultimately to get to 3 excess semester credit hours by 2030, which is a very ambitious target for us. So you can see right now, the 2016 and 2017 data is here on the slide, that there was a 1 excess semester credit hour decrease for bachelors and 1 decrease for associates. And so, but overall aiming for 3 across both sectors. So there's a long way to go, but we are seeing kind of movement in the right direction here. So on that handout I showed you, it's just some additional breakout. It gives you a 3-year time period, but also breaks out full-time and part-time, and then provides some information about years to degree. The second handout is the profile for the 4-year public institutions on one side and the 2-year public institutions on the other side. And so these are the kind of profiles you will see for every public institution of higher education listed in the almanac, but these are the sector summaries. So for the 4-year public institutions, you can see on the left-hand side, first column at the bottom, in the middle there, debt of graduates. And so for the sector and for institutions, you can find average student debt. And then we've done something a little bit new with our revised accountability system, where we're breaking out native students relative to transfer students. So we wanted to take a look at there is students who start and stay at the same institution, what do their debt levels look like relative to students who are more mobile? And we say any could be 2-year to 4-year, could be 4-year to 4-year, could be lots of swirling. Anyone who didn't start and complete is going to be lumped into that transfer bucket. So you'll see there are some modest differences at the sector level, but when you go into institutions, it's very interesting, the different patterns. In some cases, it's higher for transfer students who've maybe been, we've heard some institutions say, well, students come in with all this debt and then it shows up on our profile, so they're concerned about that. So in some cases, that is true. Debt levels are higher among their mobile students, but in other cases it's lower. So if people have been at a 2-year institution and they've been paying low tuition for a couple of years and then come into a 4-year institution, it may be lower. So lots of variation, so definitely check that out for your own institution. We also, because we have access, or we include parent debt, that's something that often differs from the way institutions calculate their own student debt. So we wanted to call that out and say, for your students, what percent of this, or what amount of the average debt is from parents. And then finally, percent of students with debt. So you can see that for on the 4-year sector side, and then if you turn over to the other, you've got the 2-year, same information. It's in the 3rd column. You're looking for the debt of graduates section. So that starts with about $16,000 on average student debt for the 2-year sector, native and transfer differences, and then percent of students with debt and parent as well. So I'll just loft these out if there's time for questions. Anything that surprised you as you observe the data, or any questions that you have, I'd be happy to address.
One question that I was curious about, you had mentioned that men tend to drop out at lower amounts of debt. What was the threshold difference between men and women? Was it like significant?
So let me look at my study here. I knew someone would ask for details. So let's see. I'm going to have to get back to you. It's not right on the top of my page. But I can follow up with you with the study what exactly the percent was. But I think what it ended up as is that you see the differences in ultimately the percent of completers. And what happens is as the debt goes up to about 11,000, then they started to drop out more frequently than women who would carry on past that kind of 11,000 benchmark.
Jenna, the number of excess semester credit hours, that is for individual students taking excess hours?
So it's all so it's all completers of bachelor's degrees or associate degrees, and anyone could be in there. So you could have 0 and you would be in there if you completed right at 60 or right at 120. You could also have negative excess hours, which would go into this average. You could have negative hours for a couple of reasons. If you took dual credit, if you had AP, if there were, we don't count Dev Ed, for instance, so that wouldn't be adding to anyone's average for excess hours. So all of those people get averaged into that number. Mm-hmm.
I had a quick question. In terms of excess hours, I think it's very interesting and a great goal. Do you ever account for students who, let's say, they graduate within 4 years that are on time, but they've decided for intellectual pursuits to take additional classes, maybe over the summer, to just help strengthen? Of course, they wouldn't be eligible for financial aid for those type of courses because they don't count toward their degree per se, but they believe it's necessary to help prepare them for the job that they want above and beyond the course curriculum. Do you take into account that?
So we look at the moment that they complete. So anything that they're doing beyond that initial bachelor's completion, for example, we're not counting those. I'll also add that we don't count like second bachelor's degrees or second associate's degrees. We take that moment in time when that first associate's degree is completed or that first bachelor's is completed, and we attribute those hours to that credential.
Okay, thank you.
That's actually something we got a lot of feedback on, especially in the 2-year space, because people were saying there are multiple associate's degrees and you're sort of, we can't identify exactly which credits go with which one. And so we were potentially over-attributing some of these excess hours.
But I guess my question, just to follow up, so you could have a student who graduated in 4 years, or they're right on target, but they've taken their 120 hours to complete their degree, but in addition to it, during that 4 years, they take additional courses because they want to.
Oh, so they haven't
they're paying for those out
completed?
of pocket. They're not receiving financial aid per se because those courses aren't counting toward the degree. Do you take that situation into account, or they're all treated the same?
So in the scenario you're describing, did they actually get their credential and then they're taking more courses after that, or they've just completed the requirements for it and they're still taking more?
Well, let's say they've completed within the 120 hours, and during that 120 hours, they're taking maybe additional classes over the summer for just intellectual development. Do you take that situation into account? Would that still be considered
Any credits
excessive
that are
hours?
accumulated prior to that moment where they complete their credential, even if it was over the summer, those would be factored in. So they would be above that 120 likely if they've been doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
For community college, does that include developmental studies?
It does not.
Okay.
So it's only credit-bearing courses. Yeah, and that's actually, I mean, almost a little scary to think about. How we know there are lots of developmental courses, so where would those numbers be if those were included? So it's pretty high. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and just wrap up. So we talk about this goal in particular as having 3 big drivers. So it's about good decisions and investments kind of all the way around. So from the state side, it's about adequate funding for institutions. On the institution side, it's helping to support students to make good decisions, to maintain affordability, and make the investments in helping students complete in a timely manner, and taking out kind of the only as much debt as they need. And then on the student side, to be financially informed and make ultimately good decisions about their consumption in higher education and how much kind of debt they need, and understanding sort of their and improving their financial literacy. So we see kind of a looping interrelationship here between those 3 actors. And we do think that there are some important differences that we've observed across race and ethnic groups, across gender, and we want to continue to look at those. We think that they're really important and connected to the other parts of the plan in terms of completion and attainment that we're aiming for under the state strategic plan. And we'll continue to explore those as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. This information is very valuable, and I know all of us will be taking it back to our own institutions to look at it more carefully. So thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, the next agenda item, John. Okay. Okay, we're going to skip to agenda item F, which is our data collection subcommittee. Samantha is our chair. I know since the last time we met, we had a different chair, but now we're happy to have Samantha fill that important role for the subcommittee.
Thanks. Just a real quick update for the data collection subcommittee. And I am the new co-chair or chair of that. So if you have any questions, concerns, please let me know. I can take it to the group. If you have anything you want to brought back to the full group, let me know as well. We did meet as a subcommittee on April 10th and 11th here at the coordinating board to go over the 17-18 reporting cycle FADS manual to prepare for the second cycle since the transition from once a year to 3 times a year. Based on that work that was done and the wonderful work done by the coordinating board, they were able to publish that updated manual out by April 18th, which the data collection started on May 1st. As of yesterday, I was told that 81 of the 144 institutions has already submitted a file for Cycle 2, and that's 56% of the institutions are actually working on the Cycle 2 report. That has 2 deadlines. Ultimately, everything has to be wrapped up, I think, by August 1st. In addition, the subcommittee is going to meet again on July 17th to start to work on the 18-19 FADS Cycle 1 manual to have ready for when that will start in December. Any questions? Okay, then I guess I'll have an update in September on how it went.
Okay. Any comments about the past cycle 1 reporting? I think it was a good cycle to see what other enhancements or I think Deshay. I'm looking at Deshay.
Doubt me and bail me out.
I mean, first of all, I want to say that was a huge accomplishment, going through that first cycle. So I have to give kudos to everyone, including not only the subcommittee for coming up with recommendations, but also the coordinating board, but for all other institutions have done a great job.
Yes, I definitely want to congratulate the subcommittee team. We had a lot of new team members who made it the data collection subcommittee. I think we worked very well together to produce a second manual for reporting cycle 2. We did learn a lot of great things coming out of reporting cycle 1 as far as how data was being reported, so we could make better edits and be clearer in our guidance for the next reporting cycle 2. The same will be done for reporting cycle 3 for 17-18. And just like Samantha mentioned, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we look at deadline dates, especially since the reallocation elimination was done. So we need to make sure that we are accounting for reconciliation properly when we go into 18-19. We're also going to make sure that, given what we've learned from the first reporting cycle 1, as far as when data can be reported by the institutions, we want to make sure that when we do open up the first reporting cycle for 18-19, we take into account that we're going to get enough data as possible, especially since we're using it here at the coordinating board for several areas within the agency that's pulling out information from the FAD report. So we want to ensure that the information that we are receiving is being reported by the institutions is being reported accurately, and enough of that information we can actually use for different reasons. And so I think the first reporting cycle 1 for 17-18 was a learning for everybody. It was a solution opportunity, as we like to say here at the agency, for us to improve and continue to improve. It's a work in progress. For reporting cycle 2, we actually are doing reconciliation for the state financial aid program. So I know that's a lovely challenge for some to make sure that their state programs that they have to reconcile are being reported accurately with the file that they're using. And so we are hoping that with, again, 81 institutions, I think is very encouraging for reporting cycle 2, that we can get everyone through validation by August 1st and then start beginning reporting cycle 3, which then has a deadline in December, like Samantha mentioned. But definitely kudos to everyone involved, and I look forward to meeting with the group again July 17th.
Alan, did you have a question?
As Art, as these changes happen with being able to spend money through August 1st, I guess that will change in future years. The reconciliation would have to be done in the third phase instead of number 2.
Right, we're going to be looking through all sorts of different factors as to how timing might need to change, whether it be the change in the allocation process. We've also talked in this group before about needing to better reconcile with exemptions and waivers, and so how we might be able to better time things so that IFRS data can be used in the reconciliation process. We've also mentioned in this meeting before about trying to move to a more efficient manner of processing your requests for funding. And so that would impact as well how we reconcile. So there's definitely a bunch of moving parts that Deshay and the committee are looking at. Sorry, I said Christine, I meant Samantha, drugs. So looking at how they all fit together as to what the most effective timing is going to be.
Yeah, I definitely like to add, Alan, we have to take those things in consideration. Again, learning what we did from the first reporting cycle, deadline dates are very important because it definitely will drive how you're going to pull your data out of your system based upon when the portal opens for you to submit a file and when you need to have it validated or certified. So those are definitely some things, like Charles mentioned, that we will bring to the committee on July 17th to look for 18-19, because there's a lot of different things that have changed from the 17-18 year to the 18-19 year that we need to factor in.
Okay, thank you for presenting at our TCC conference, and you even got some applause, didn't you?
Yes, Alan was gracious enough to applaud us. So we appreciate all those applause. But we, Tanya, when I say we, Tanya and I, Tanya Trevino, for some of y'all who've had the opportunity to work with her over the many years with FADS, have definitely partnered up to ensure that we are providing enough training and answering enough questions to the administrators out there. We enjoy attending the conferences. We do learn a lot of great information, and we bring it back in-house to see what we can do to constantly improve this FAD reporting. Again, since it has eliminated a lot of reports throughout the agency, we want to make sure that this particular comprehensive report is capturing all the data that's needed for the agency to move forward with their business needs.
So if there aren't any other questions for Deshay, I would like to go ahead and give a round of applause for the subcommittee and Deshay and Tanya. So, thank you.
Thank you as well.
Okay, now we're going to go back to agenda item E, an update on external relations. And we have Lisa Battles here. I'm sorry, Linda. Excuse me, Linda. Linda Battles here to do the update. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm so sorry that our external relations staff couldn't be here today, but they're actually down at the Capitol. The House Higher Education Committee is holding a joint hearing with the Public Education Committee to talk about teacher quality. And then they're also talking about innovation in higher education and what sort of obstacles should be removed from either statute or rules to allow institutions to be more innovative in terms of achieving the goals of 60 by 30 techs and their institutional goals. So again, apologize for John Wyatt not being able to be here, and also his assistant director who would have normally stepped in, Lizette Montiel, is also down there. But I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Agency Operations and Communications. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at the Coordinating Board, and I oversee our External Relations Department in addition to our Financial Services, our HR Department, and our IT Department. So I'm going to give you just a little overview of where we're at in terms of the legislative process. You probably heard from John Wyatt at your last meeting on what our priorities were going to be considered by the board in April, and they indeed adopted those legislative priorities. So I'm not going to go into detail about those, but just to remind you some of the major ones that we are recommending that impact, obviously, the work that you all do at your institutions. The first one has to do with the Texas Works program, which we had recommended last session. This was a proposal to sort of centralize the Texas Works study program. As you recall, or as you know, y'all are required to do at least 20%, not more than 50% off campus. We heard some of the challenges that some of our institutions, particularly institutions in rural areas, having difficulty in getting those awards out. At the same time, we had been approached by a major corporation operating in Texas, Amazon, and they were interested in funding 500 internships, paid internships across the state, but were not interested in having to enter into a contract with each individual institution in the area where they wanted to go. And so they approached us in terms of trying to administer this and bring some administrative efficiencies for their end. We did make a proposal. It did not pass, primarily because there was a an attempt to bar undocumented students from participating in the program. And so the bill did die, but we will be pursuing that. And in fact, we're probably going to tweak the proposal a bit. We're working on that during the interim. In fact, tomorrow we have invited the Texas Workforce Commission to make a presentation to us, our staff, about the Texas Internship Challenge program that TEA, the Workforce Commission, and the Coordinating Board launched a couple of years ago to try and encourage more private employers to participate in paid internships and provide a centralized online location for students to go looking for jobs that match their interests. And so we want to look at that initiative to see how we could connect our proposal with that challenge, that internship challenge program, and see how we can leverage and help support one another in that vein. So we will be coming forward with a more specific proposal, but the concept I think you're aware of, and so we should have more information as we get closer into the session that we will certainly share with you. The other proposal that we are still pursuing is the limitation of the Texas grant program from 150 semester credit hours to 135. It is a strategy in our 60 by 30 TEX plan to encourage students to graduate more timely, and we believe that providing students with 150 semester credit hours doesn't necessarily provide them with incentives to complete sooner. And certainly we could see significant savings from reducing that and being able to put that money back into the program to serve more students. At least that is our goal and that's our intent. That would be our recommendation to the legislature. We will also recommend the ability for students who are enrolled in a community college baccalaureate degree who qualify for a Texas grant to be able to utilize that to the same number of hours. Just because they're at a community college does not mean that they would be limited to the number of hours that like a TEOG grant would be. So I guess they would be getting a TEOG or okay, I know you're feeling poorly today, so I'm sorry. I won't rely on you. But let me just really quickly move on. One other thing that does impact your work is y'all are probably familiar with our compliance monitoring department here at the Coordinating Board. That department was created through our Sunset Bill back in 2013 to ensure that our financial aid dollars were being utilized by the institutions in accordance with state law and Coordinating Board rules. So we do have a team of 4 FTE who go into the institutions to conduct these audits on our major financial aid programs. And what we will be seeking this session is a change in the statute that currently requires institutions to report credible waste, fraud, and abuse directly to the state auditor's office. We want to be included in that reporting process because that will help inform our auditors in terms of, because they do risk-based audits, that will help inform their plans and where to target their efforts. So those are some of the key legislative changes. We are in the process, even though we have not received our LAR instructions from the LBB yet, we are in the process of developing our legislative appropriations request. We are assuming that we are going to be asked for a 10% reduction, as we have been asked over the last several biennia. So we will be preparing a 2-5% budget reduction scenarios, and hopefully that wouldn't be the case, but it would be difficult to assume not and then have to rush to try and make those recommendations, bring them together. So we're planning on it. We're also planning on the legislature allowing us to, again, submit exceptional item requests. And of course, as you know, the exceptional item request is above and beyond your level funding that you receive for program on the current biennium, based on the current biennium. So we're working on those. We don't have anything definitive to report at this point, but obviously we're looking at all of our financial aid programs. We're looking at Texas Grant to see how much we would need. Right now, we currently serve approximately 92% of all eligible students at our public universities at a $5,000 average award amount. We'd like to see that average award amount come up. We don't know by how much and what's the appropriate amount and how much that would cost and how much it would cost to fund 100%. So we're running all these scenarios right now. We're doing the same for TEOG and TEG and work study. And we hope to be able to have something over the next month, because we will be going to our Agency Operations Committee and Board meeting in July for approval. I think that's all I needed to report at this point, unless you have any questions. I'm done.
So, my apologies for the kind of snafu on the scheduling and everything. In terms of the legislative proposals that the subcommittee developed, we'll talk about those more at the September meeting when John can be with us. So I know that he's looked at those and we've talked about those, but I don't want to incorrectly give you any information today. So we'll put that on to the September agenda.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Linda. At this time, let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break. So let's say we'll just come back here about 10:50, 10:55, or 10:50, 55. Okay. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. And we're now moving forward to Agenda Item G, which is an update regarding the administrative code revisions. Chad had provided the information for us ahead of time to review it. So I'm now going to hand this over to you.
Great. Thank you. I mentioned in a prior meeting that we're kind of in the midst of going through all of the administrative code to try to figure out what items might be outdated to be removed, what items might just need to be edited, things like that. And one of the pieces that I wanted to get all of your input on was the piece related to the proration of our three primary grant programs, Texas Grant, TEOG, and TEG. The statute allows the coordinating board to develop rules around the proration. It's a place where we may adopt rules as opposed to a shall adopt rules. And one of the Texas Grant and the TEOG specifically talk about the idea of increasing or decreasing in proportion to the number of semester credit hours. For the TEG program, it's more the broad-based fact that we can make reasonable regulations consistent with the purpose of the program. One of the pieces about kind of the may versus shall item, you can see right in the code that we currently have, and I love it when I look down and immediately see a typo. I'm so proud of myself at those moments. Sorry about that. I can spell some days. With the Texas Grant, with all these programs, we kind of exercise the may authority in the sense that we didn't create any rules for students enrolled in excess of the standard full-time. We only created rules if they were below the standard full-time. So that's kind of an example of the may as opposed to shall. But as I looked through it, and I looked at the three different ones, I'll be honest that just for me, it took me a while to figure out kind of why we had all of these things in here. We've got two different proration sections in Texas Grant, two different proration sections in TEOG, and then three different proration items in TEG. And wanted to kind of just get your input as to whether or not the rules that exist you feel are critical the way they are in order for you to administer the program, or whether it would be more effective for you to have kind of a more simplified approach, something along the lines of 9 credits and above, 100%, less than 9 credits, 50%, something very straightforward like that. But rather than just writing something up, putting it out to the Texas Register to get comments that way, I thought I'd start by getting your input here as to whether or not this is a piece of code that you think is critical, or whether you'd be okay with it being simplified. Thoughts?
I'm okay with simplifying it. I mean, I think the example that you used about combining under Texas Grant, because if it is 9 or more hours, it is 100% of the maximum award. So that was an example you gave. And, I mean, to me, that makes sense, but I'm going to hand it over to the committee to see if there's any other comments. Any other thoughts?
And I mean, if I may, to me, it looks, I guess from like the student perspective, I really like the focus when it's, I guess in perspective, when it's individually contoured. I don't know. I guess to me, from my perspective, showing these different outlines of the hour requirements and, of course, how much percentage of the award is actually going to, even though, I mean, of course, I'm still learning as much as I can, and of course, I don't know the specific thresholds for the amount of students across the state that are actually going in from like 6 to 8 hours or 9 to 11 or anything else, so that's where, to me, it's still, I kind of like, I guess, having it a little bit more specified instead of simplifying it. I guess that's just my perspective, because I like individually kind of like mapping things out, and I guess from the student perspective, it gives me a little bit more information of what my options are, I guess, per se. I do understand like the administrative and kind of like the aggregate level of, simplifying and everything else for the institutional, I guess, focus. But I kind of like the specificity, I think I'm making up words now, of having, just this coverage right here.
So the way it's presented to students, is it different when it's presented to students where they see it online versus what's here? An administrative code?
Well, no, the administrative code is the administrative code.
Right.
So the administrative code is for the oversight of the program. And so it provides the guidelines for institutions to be able to utilize the program. How institutions might present that at their own institution in the kind of consumer information that they provide to students might be different, as well as what we put out on the College for All Texans in terms of, and when I say different, I mean whether it's numbered versus bulleted versus summarized, it still has to align with the administrative code no matter what. So it's not that there's an administrative code for the institutions and then schools can do something different. So some of it I'm just like, with Texas Grant, you've got if the student's balance of eligible hours is less than the number of hours she is taking in a given semester, and then we have beginning with awards for the 15-16 award year, but beginning no later than fiscal year 2002 or 2012. So I'm just thinking that maybe we haven't provided you with clear, like I'm worried that, not so much simplifying, I'm worried that we haven't made it clear for you as to what you're supposed to be doing. Like if you looked at this, would you be able to figure out quickly what you're supposed to be able to do to be able to explain it to a student, or have we made it too complicated for you?
Because maybe it's just looking at the fact that if it's, like, take the first piece of this, just that first part, if it's 12 or more hours, 100%, 9 to 11, 100%, 6 to 8, 50%, because it is wordy. But I agree. I mean, I think they're kind of saying the same thing, but you're just looking at a simplicity for just the written verbiage. And so that it doesn't even appear to conflict is what you're saying? Right, Chad?
So that both so it doesn't appear to conflict and whether or not there's any opportunity for consistency across the three programs. Because the TEOG is 75% for 9 to less than 12 semester credit hours, but the TEG and the Texas Grant is 100% for 9 to less than 12 semester credit hours. And thus, as students go from 2-year institutions to 4-year institutions, the rules kind of change on them as they go through. And so I guess that would be a specific question that I would ask for the 2-year institutions, whether you feel, yes, we really should have this 3/4 time rate for 2-year institutions, even though 4-year institutions don't have a 3/4 time proration.
The more that we can align them, I think the easier it is for students as they go from one to the next. With the goal of getting students to complete on time, I think a 3/4 rate and then a full-time do make sense to try to get students to enroll in the 12 hours and help keep that financial motivation.
I mean, I'm all for giving students more money, but it is consistent with the outright proration that we have to do for the TEOG. Student is only in 9 to 11, they only get 75% of the award anyway through the whole life of the TEOG. And then at the end now, if they go full-time but only have 9 to 11 eligible, now they're going to get 100%. It's consistent with the other rule of proration that we have with TEOG. And I'm assuming this is only coming into play once or twice. I mean, this is the balance remaining, so it would only be their last semester. Right?
You're talking about the second part
Yeah,
as
the
opposed to
second
the first part?
So we're trying to align it with Texas Grant, so it's their last semester Texas Grant, their last semester of TEOG.
I was asking about in general as a whole, as opposed to the different parts of it. So kind of thinking, does it provide greater flexibility for the institutions to meet the needs of the students to have something that applies throughout their education, as opposed to kind of having different rules as to if you're on your second semester versus you're on your last semester versus you're in a 4-year college versus you're in a 2-year college. But based on what you're saying, it sounds like we should have different rules depending on when they're in. So I think like a comparison I have is back when I was in a financial aid office, that what I thought was an awful rule, that awful rule about having to prorate the Stafford or the direct loan if they were in their last semester and not enrolled full time, and you had to do that whole weird calculation thing, so nobody knew what they were going to get until they actually did it. But if you all think that it's better to have a bunch of different breakdowns, depending on when and where they are in their programs, we can keep all the different breakdowns.
And I think that, like, the thing that we battle against is like keeping all of our grant programs the same. So if I have to teach my students, okay, here's the rule for Pell Grant, here's the rule for SEOG, but yeah, it doesn't work the same way for TEOG, then that's a negative for having consistency among our programs. So that's why I would advocate for leaving that 75%. And I also would think, I know that Texas grant's different, but wouldn't that be some more supportive of the 60/30 rule to get people to graduate? I would think. So I would think you wouldn't want to eliminate it, because surely that's got some pressure to get students to take more hours.
Part of the challenge of the program, or part of the thing that I think about in relation to as you all administer these pieces, is that piece that if you give like TEOG and Texas grant specifically, this doesn't apply to TEG, but if you give them any money, you have to make sure that their tuition and fees are covered. So whether it's, even if we make you prorate the TEOG, you're just going to have to come up with other money to still make sure that their tuition and fees are covered. You don't get to, say we're only going to cover 75% of your tuition and fees because you're 3/4 time. So they're still going to get that much money, regardless of where it comes from. So, but it sounds like that level of flexibility isn't something that's needed in your areas. You'd rather have kind of the set proration pieces.
Let me make sure I understand. So for Texas grant, the proration for Texas grant applies when they're close to 150%. Is that correct? I'm looking at my counterparts here.
150 hours.
Yeah, 150 hours. Okay. All right. But the language that's here for Texas grant, where it says 9 to 11 hours is 100% the maximum award, that's based on disbursement, that as long as they have at least 9 hours, they get 100%. It doesn't talk about, you see?
Yes.
Yeah. This.
Because the language in here is all talking about balance of eligible attempted
Yes.
hours. It doesn't
It doesn't
say
talk
anything
about the
about in your, just someone's in their sophomore year and
Right.
they're taking a semester where they're taking 6 credits.
And on
According to these rules, this proration doesn't apply because it's only talking about balance of eligible hours in both of these sections. Whereas interestingly, and I kind of look to Deshay as I say this out loud, I'm pretty sure our program guidelines indicate that they're supposed to be prorating. So I don't think our program guidelines are in line with our rule on this case. We'll have to take a look at that.
On College for All Texans, because it says be enrolled at least 3/4 time. Is the guidance to the student. Yeah.
To be eligible for the grant.
Right.
Right.
To be
Right.
eligible for the
And so-
grant.
Right.
But then you have the other portion of the proration, and that's where I don't think it's clear on this
I agree.
Texas grant.
Right. Right.
And this is why I wanted to bring it to all of you, so that you could help us see the things that we might not be seeing, because we're not administering the grant programs to the students. We're providing you with the guidance. So whereas if you look at the TEOG on the next page, the TEOG, the first one, B3, is just in any given term, what number of credits are they taking, regardless of balance of eligible hours. And then the second is the balance of,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. I wanted to make sure I wasn't,
Yeah.
and not understanding.
I was looking at the TEOG and I'm like, yeah, I don't see a problem. But now I see there's a complete difference between Texas Grant and TEOG on that.
Yep.
Because I was going to go back into, let's just change our rules. We don't prorate anymore, right? 100%.
Well, this gives me some good pieces to go back and analyze a little more. One about, how, to what extent can we have consistency across not just the state grant programs, but the federal grant programs? Because I know that's a piece that actually has come up in the legislative recommendations from the subcommittee, are there places where we can better align the state programs with the federal programs, whether it be SAP, the drug requirement, things like that. So I'll go back and use this feedback to try to look at what we might need to do to just make it clearer in general for everything. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it.
Okay, the next agenda item, discussion state deadline language on FAFSA. You also had a handout for that was previously shared with you before this meeting. And this is to talk about the language used. And I'm going to hand it over to Chad again.
So each year, the Department of Ed requests updates from each state as to what the language is going to be that's supplied on the FAFSA regarding deadlines for that state. The request came in too late for me to get it onto the agenda for the March meeting. So I provided kind of the thing that we'd provided in the past. I try to be consistent with the past, but really want to do more to make sure that I get your input in the future when we supply this information to the Department of Ed as to the specific language that's going to appear on the FAFSA. And I gave you a handout that has all the different states and what they write and what they don't write, and you'll notice that Texas is definitely one of the more lengthy ones in terms of our information. And one of the things to be aware of as well is that on the paper PDF FAFSA, they have codes that you then have to go look at what the code meant, whereas on the FAFSA on the web, it's just the full text. But what we have used, what we're going to be using is, we start with saying as soon as possible after October 1st, 2018, the goal there being to encourage students to get on this process. We added that line last year when they moved the deadline. It was last year that they moved the deadline, right? Or has it been 2 years now? Just one. Has it been two? Oh, wow. Wow, God, time flies. So we added that line to try to encourage. Interestingly, the Department of Ed thought that they interpreted that as we changed our deadline. And I had to explain, no, we didn't change our deadline. We're just trying to encourage people to get on this. So we say as soon as possible after October 1, 2018, Texas public colleges January 15th, 2019. So we're updating that for this coming year because we changed, based on discussions in this group, we moved to the January 15th. And so we say for priority consideration, submit application by date specified. Additional forms may be required because each institution gets to decide what does it mean to have met that January 15th. Is it just the FAFSA or is it the FAFSA and other information? And then Texas private colleges, check with your financial aid administrator. While Texas private colleges are encouraged to utilize the January 15th deadline, they're not required. And again, additional forms may be required. And so if you look up top, there's some other, there's kind of some standard language that can be used. So there's a by midnight Central Time if we want to get that specific with things. For priority consideration, submit application by date specified. Some states will say applicants encouraged to keep a record of their submission by printing out their online FAFSA confirmation page or obtaining proof of mailing. Additional forms may be required. And then awards made until funds are depleted. So those are kind of common things that are utilized by other states. And so I wanted to check with you all as to next time round, when we get to the 2021, whether you what any of that additional text suggestions from the top should be utilized, whether ours is too wordy. What are your thoughts on how we want to encourage students to apply based on the FAFSA language?
Chad, the one comment I have is that I know with the priority deadline having been March the 15th, our concerns was that was really too late in terms of packaging for students, so we added the language, apply as soon after October 1 as possible. Now that we've moved that priority deadline to January 15th, maybe that language is no longer needed in relative to October 1, and that might help shorten it, because really we want to communicate to students, get it done by January 15th for awarding purposes in terms of the priority paradigm.
So maybe, for the first couple of years, once we moved to October 1st, we needed to kind of point it out to students, but maybe we're beyond that now, that we don't have to point that out.
That's a good suggestion. So take that out. Yeah. Is everybody else in agreement with that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree because students look at that, and not so much here, but when we advertise our priority deadline on our website, it's not really a deadline, but we talk about it in context of a deadline. It's for priority consideration, but students read it as that's a deadline. So we have lots of students come to us and say, I realize it's too late to apply for financial aid for this year. Like, no, who told you that? Well, I saw the deadline. No, it's, so we do a lot of work to explain that to students.
I guess, so one of the things, if on, for the Texas public colleges, if we just put January 15th, I think one of the things Chad's saying is, should we say that that's a priority, make sure they're clear it's a priority date, it's not a deadline.
Using that standard language that they have, that for priority consideration, submit
Right.
application by date specified.
Because you don't want someone to assume if you didn't have it by January 15th, you can't apply. And we deal with that. So, I thought it was March 15th. It's like, you can still apply after March 15th. That was a priority consideration. So I think inserting priority does help for a student and parent to understand that, it's a priority consideration, but not a deadline.
So the statement is already on there for the FAFSA on the web. So it would be adding that to the paper deadline.
That's so removing the October one and then adding.
Has it has for priority consideration?
It's actually there because that's what the little hashtag means. If you go up to the top,
at the top.
the hashtag means for priority consideration,
yeah.
submit application by date specified.
I forgot we have to decode it.
Yeah, you have to decode it. Yeah, making it simple.
Right.
Unfortunately, students take the shortcut and don't go and see what that hashtag is. And so they say January 15th.
Yep.
Okay, I missed it. And that's the battle that I think we fight a lot.
And just to kind of resonate what Mr. Pixie said, sometimes we'll be glancing over it, and sometimes we're just so kind of overwhelmed because we're like, I know for like myself, starting the process, even though some of the language was very simple, you're kind of, you overthink it, or just, smaller little details and variables and whatnot. And I know for myself that definitely would have helped, because at first I also thought, I have to finish it off like as soon as I can, of course, for priority and whatnot. But that was, after a little bit of time of asking around and double checking with individuals. And I think it definitely helps, especially just the thought of it kind of overwhelms us, or at least for myself, it was. And I was kind of, even just simple words, sometimes are taken out, and we just overthink it.
Well, and I'm wondering if by removing some of the other language that's on there, like the as soon as possible language, and if there's any other language we can remove, whether that might help students see the most critical piece, or whether that priority consideration is getting lost in the paragraph of information on there. Do many of you require additional forms to be considered? Like in determining their date for the priority deadline, do you go based on the FAFSA, or do you go based on the FAFSA plus other forms?
We just go like received by processor. So for instance, on Texas Grant, we look and say, did the processor date that we loaded into our system have like March 15th? It doesn't matter if verification wasn't completed at that point, because we package without verification. Right. We're just making sure they hit the processor by that date. That's what we do.
Is that a standard, or?
Yes.
We do the same thing. So
Do you think that's? Do you think that's true for other schools that aren't represented here right now in general? Like, do you know many other schools that make them do both the FAFSA and an institutional application or something like that?
I think that's true for most public universities. I don't think I can speak for private institutions, though, but I think public universities and community colleges are going to use the FAFSA date.
Who are my privates at this point? They're all gone. Yeah, Mike Scott's not here. Doris is off, and Ann was off. Okay, got to get some more privates back on here. So maybe removing that additional forms may be required line after for priority consideration might be useful to get rid of that line so that people can focus more on the sentence that says for priority consideration. If that's the only thing that was there.
In fairness to the Texas privates, it says check with your financial aid administrator. So if you're checking with your financial aid administrator, as it says to do, they would let you know if there's any additional forms or not. Because the additional forms is kind of should be a generic for both institutions.
Right.
Just an argument.
So maybe just say, instead of all the words that are there, Texas Public Colleges, January 15th, 2019, for priority consideration, submit application by date specified. And for Texas private colleges, check with your financial aid administrator.
Texas, because you're starting a new sentence there, you could say the Texas Public Colleges, January 15, 2019, but don't start a new sentence, just say for priority consideration.
That part I'm not sure if we can change, because I think it has to do with how the FAFSA codes their sentences. Like, we don't get to write whatever sentences we want. We kind of have to work within the sentence structure that they provide. And so that's one of their pieces, is it's a separate sentence that says for priority consideration, submit application by date specified.
Just saying submit application by date specified, just add something that seems like that's the date you've specified, and that's the deadline for completing the application. So seems like, unspoken redundancy, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, not I'll admit I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to change the feds.
Deadline that I need to submit the FAFSA.
Yeah.
You're looking for what's the deadline for submitting the FAFSA, and then we're saying this date which should be like, that should be it. I don't need any more. But then we go on to say, submit by this date, submit your application by this date. That's already done.
Oh, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, the only thing I'm saying is I don't know if the feds will let me change that sentence structure. Because another thing I'm thinking is maybe just don't even put Texas Public Colleges in the front of it, just lead with January 15th, 2019 for priority consideration, submit application by date specified, and then afterwards say Texas private colleges, check with your financial aid administrator. So that way it takes even more language out of there and really hits on that priority piece.
My other thought is, I wonder how many people actually go and look for what the deadlines are for the state. It's probably not real high, I would imagine. But
I want to make sure I'm representing what you all want represented.
And Chad, not to belabor the point, but the reference to private schools and checking with the administration, I think it might be good just to say in general, check with your financial or your administrators for financial aid and not limit that just to private schools, because I think as a general philosophy, I think it's good for all students, regardless of where they plan to attend, to check base with their financial administrators just to make sure they're on top of everything.
So you're talking more general advice as opposed to related to the deadline? Like, because when...
Well, I think it's implied by being on there that's related to the deadline. So I think you just referenced for the first time, that first line, the priority deadline being January 15th, and be sure to check with your financial aid administrator for any additional details.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't.
No need to apologize.
I'll give you his cell phone. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, so we're back to Texas Public Colleges, January 15, 2019. For priority consideration, submit application by date specified. Is that right? And then Texas.
Is the Texas Public Colleges necessary, or can we just lead with January 15th, 2019?
I think we can just...
And then say Texas private colleges, check with your financial aid administrator.
Yes.
Because
Mm-hmm.
go to a private college
Mm-hmm.
and I start reading January 15th.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So basically, having to rely on, if we took the words out, we'd have to rely on them actually reading the entire sentence. Since we can't rely on them actually reading the entire sentence, we have to put more words in. Okay.
Do we have a question from the audience? Marilyn?
You need to use one of the mics, or else the people on the phone can't hear you.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Sorry, Kathy won't be able to hear you if you don't talk into a mic.
Just quickly, I work in a student engagement office, and because of that March 15th deadline, so many students, I said, did you apply? Did you apply at the FAFSA? They were like, oh, I already passed the deadline, I can't. And I didn't even notice that, you know. So I thought, oh, you gotta wait till next year.
Mm-hmm.
So that was many students.
Thank you.
There's also a line that is offered that many other states utilize that say that awards are made until funds are depleted. Is that a line that people are interested in adding, or is that a line that people feel is just adding too much language to this?
That would probably help address the priority deadline and help let students know they can turn it in after that.
I know it might be a little wordy, but at least reading it from my perspective, it kind of tells me like, oh, you got to get on the ball a little bit quicker. It adds a little bit of a more emphasis per se to really finish it as quick as possible.
Who else wants to weigh in? I want to make sure that whatever I submit, everyone's okay with.
Current version is what we have. So when do you have to submit it for 2021?
Not till next March.
Till next March, okay.
I just missed the, literally, I just couldn't get it on the agenda in time for our March meeting. So I also want to make sure we don't spend the next 4 meetings debating 5 lines of text. So why don't we leave it at, I'll bring it up in prior business at the next meeting so that people can give their final opinions on what should or shouldn't, and we'll go from there. Thank you for the input.
All right, thank you. Okay, our next agenda item, it's Chad again, and we are on agenda item I, annual financial aid report. You're on.
Wouldn't you know, I'd pick this meeting to have myself on 5 different agenda items. If you look in the handouts that were provided, you'll see on the 3rd page of Appendix E, we break down, it's actually on the 3rd page and the 5th page because we do it for 2 different groups, but we break down the groups by income levels, and we do them in $5,000 increments, and the top increment is above $100,000. And we have probably been doing this set of increments for as long as we've been doing this report. My thought is, given how incomes have changed in the past 20 years, 30 years, that it might be more helpful to do the income brackets in $10,000 increments as opposed to $5,000 increments, and also go to like a $200,000 cap as opposed to a $100,000 cap, or maybe a $150,000 cap. But I honestly don't know how you all utilize this information from this report. I would hate to change something and not ask anyone about it and then discover that, you've been taking this report every year for the past 20 years and loading it into an Excel document to compare and things like that. So I don't want to kind of undo things for you. So wanted to check with you as to whether or not you'd be okay with us moving to $10,000 increments and a cap of $150,000. And it's totally okay if you want to say you don't care.
And these appendices are students who demonstrated need. One is if they received aid, and then the other one, which is F, is if they did not receive aid. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So if you move the cap up to 200,000, are you going to find that there's going to be data there for the higher income?
Oh yeah, we have all the income. We have the exact income of each person.
Okay.
Right now, we're just doing greater than or equal to 100,000. So if you look on the 3rd page, you'll see like in private or independent institutions, there's 15,568 people that are in the income greater than or equal to 100,000.
Okay.
If we went to 150,000, we would just break that out to provide a more delineated, so you'd have 100 to 110, 110 to 120, et cetera. But it's all just based on the FADS data. We're just pulling the AGI information that you report on FADS, so we have exactly what you have, or total income that you report on FADS.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed for two-year schools, that number's pretty low, like 3,400 students versus 91,000 in the lowest income. But when I look at private, 15,568 versus 13,382, that number becomes lost, and like, unless you just don't care about any of those group over 100,000, I would think it would be better to raise that cap to 150 or 200,000. I would suggest, in case someone is a data nerd and they've been tracking all this stuff, I mean, could you just keep the 5,000 increments? Because that might still be relevant to somebody, especially in the lower income categories. Not so much over 100,000, it's not, but just continue that 5,000 increment would be my thought, but definitely raise the cap. Might give more meaning to 15,568. Were those people that were just slightly making more than 100,000, or were they billionaires out there? I don't know.
Yeah, and the four-year publics have 34,000 in that category as well, and so.
I think on Apply Texas too, I'm just thinking about other things I've seen. I think it goes up to like 200,000, and then it just says 200,000 or above. I'm just trying to think of consistency with some of the reports that I've seen when we're looking at some of those income grids.
That's a great idea. I didn't realize that, to be honest, that there was an income grid in that, so I can go see if we can try to align ourselves with other pieces.
I think Ellen's is, I mean, I don't know, as far as data gurus, that 5,000 increment may be more helpful to them. A lot of grids I think we see on incomes, and I think on Apply Texas as well, is at the 10,000 grid, but not diving into the numbers all the time. I don't know. The 5,000 could make a difference for some in that sector, but I couldn't speak to that. So.
I can go check this, but I'll just ask in case anyone knows off the top of their head. Does iPads have a lump? Like, do they go by 5s, by 10s, by?
I think they go by. I think they go by 10s, but I can't tell you exactly off the top of my head, and I know my data person's is
We'll check iPads and see whether or not they have. So Apply Texas is one place we can look for income grids. iPads is another place that we can look for income grids.
And FizApp, does anybody know on FizApp, is it 10,000? I think it's 10,000.
10,000.
Well, actually, I think that's a good idea for us to go and look at, okay, how is this stuff being lumped other places to try to make our data a little more useful, so that if people are trying to compare between these different things, as opposed to them having to go through additional steps to try to make the comparison. So I'll look at iPads, I'll look at FizApp, I'll look at Apply Texas, and we'll actually do some research internally to see if there's any other income grids that we might not be aware of that are out there. Again, thank you for the input.
Okay. The next item's yours again, Chad. We're on the FAAC nomination process.
And I should have just left this in prior business because I don't really have much of an update. Sorry about that. The nominations process closed on May 25th. I'm in the process of reviewing all the nominations. And for those of you who haven't heard me mention this before, I go through and I analyze geographic representation, sector representation, system representation, look at all the different pieces to try to make sure that we've got as broad-based representation as possible. So once I've completed that, what I do is I recommend a slate both to the agency's executive officers to review and give me any feedback, as well as to the Financial Aid Advisory Committee chairs for them to give me feedback. And then we'll be presenting that slate at the September Board Committee on Accountability, Affordability, and Planning for approval. So when I looked briefly after the May 25th deadline, it did look like we had good representation from all the different sectors. I haven't really gone into an analysis at this point, but it wasn't like we had nobody from a 2-year or nobody from a private or something like that. So I will let you know as I keep working on that.
Any questions for Chad? Okay. The next agenda item is chat again, but we're almost done, so I think this is your last agenda item. So it's the Office of Student Financial Aid Programs, an update.
You probably should have me do these when I'm sick, because we fly through these meetings when I don't have the chance to be charming or anything. So one of the things that I mentioned previously in our last meeting, that back in January, we set our top priority as working to hire 14 new staff members by July 1st in order to close the gap created during the hiring freeze, as well as address challenges we faced in our service levels. And at this point, I'm pleased to say that we have hired 13 new staff since January. We have one offer that we're working on making, so I'm hoping by the end of the week we'll actually hit the 14 goal. And we're already in the process of reviewing application materials for 4 more positions to fill vacancies that occurred since January when we set out the target. When you have a staff of 73, you always have some people leaving, so we will always be looking for more people. But as I've mentioned, that, my goal is that we're always, we have like 3 or 4 vacancies that we're working on as opposed to 13 or 14 vacancies. So kudos to the SFAP staff for everything that they've done to review the hundreds of, we probably, if you add them all together, have literally gotten more than 1,000 applications for all these different positions. So kudos for all the work that they've done, and looking forward to seeing how that can help improve our service levels accordingly. In borrower services specifically, the TASP nomination process opened on April 15th for legislatures to submit their nominations and runs through July 31st. So that's up and running. The CAL interest rate was reduced from 6.6% to 5.3% on May 14th. And I want to acknowledge that we probably didn't communicate that as effectively to the institutions as we could have. In our efforts to attempt to help the borrowers take advantage of the new rate, we did it in a way that was far too confusing for institutions. So we've made some notes for the future as to how we can make it less confusing as to what exactly is going on. So, but we are excited that we were able to drop the rate down to 5.3%, which is an excellent rate, especially considering no origination fee. We're also continuing to take advantage of new features that are available within our new integrated voice response system. So one of the things that we have just recently enacted is implementing the automated dialing for our due diligence activities. And so this has reduced the amount of time that we've had to dedicate to our due diligence, because instead of having someone have to literally dial every number, it goes through the numbers that we grab every morning. The significance of that is that it then frees up individuals to be able to help with inbound calling. Since they're spending less time on outbound, they can help more on the inbound calling. So it's really helping in both areas to have implemented that. And then later this month, we're looking to implement some additional caller verification techniques for borrowers to confirm their identity. Right now, if they call in and we already have the phone number that they're calling in on in our records, and I'm going to say this wrong because my head's just not right, but there's 2 other things that they can do in the system to say, I think it's date of birth and social security number. I'm getting nods, okay. So they can enter their date of birth, their social security number, and the phone number. We're also going to be adding a new PIN option so that they'll be able to set up a PIN and they could use their PIN instead of having to use their social security number. Or one of the things right now is that if they call in but they're not calling from a phone number that we have on file, they can't meet our 3-prong test to verify who they are, so they have to talk to someone in order to verify who they are. Once they have a PIN, if they aren't calling from the phone number that we have on file, they can use that PIN as their third prong, and so they won't have to go and talk to someone. So it'll allow more students to just verify themselves right through the system, as opposed to having to get on the phone and talk to someone and give all the information to verify. So we are continuing to look for ways to make it easier for borrowers to utilize our IVR system. Along in terms of financial aid services, you've recently seen a flurry of activity in terms of allocations, and so I believe, but I am not positive, because I'll admit I was reading these things at night in a hotel room, but I think everything but BOT is sent out at this point. So all of the allocations except BOT have been released. BOT will be released soon. We're just doing a little more data scrubbing on BOT than we have in the past, simply because we're coming up on the second to last year and want to make sure that we're kind of spreading out the money where it needs to go. And then something that I'm excited about is that for the first time, you can now get to the SFAP website without having to know the secret code to get there. Because before, you couldn't get to our website unless you knew the big, huge, long, Kathy, you can't see me, but I have my hands very far apart, the whole email. Now, if you go to our new website, the new agency website, if you go under the Institutions and Resources section, you can get to the Student Financial Aid Program's website right from the agency's homepage. And so we're hoping that's going to make it a lot easier for you and your staff, the staff members who haven't been there forever and know the secret way to get there, or have bookmarked it. They'll be able to find it right from our homepage as well. So excited about that. A couple other things that we've been working on. It's legislative reporting time in our area, so we've been hard at work assembling the annual Texas grant report, which is going to go to the CAPS meeting in June and then to the board meeting in July. And then the annual financial aid report goes to the CAPS meeting in September and the annual meeting or the board meeting in October. And so I will plan on presenting information on both of those reports at the September meeting. I'll give you information on what we've learned in both of those areas and provide you an update on those pieces. And then as well, I mentioned in the last meeting that I'm working to be more transparent with you all about the priorities of the efforts that we're making in the student financial aid programs, and where we're focusing our efforts to try to improve automation, improve information, et cetera. So one of the handouts that you got today was our project oversight document and all the different projects that we're looking at, and kind of gives you an idea of which ones we've prioritized towards the top versus which ones are more kind of waiting until we have time to tackle them. I'm not going to go through those in detail at each meeting, but I do want to provide that report to you, that document, every quarter, just so that you have a chance to look and provide any feedback. If you want to call me or email me or give me feedback, you can give me feedback right now if you have it. I'm guessing you probably haven't gone through it in detail in the past 2 days or a few days since we sent it out. But I do want to hear from you all if you're seeing something that you're thinking we should be prioritizing much higher than we are, or if you're wondering why have they put that one as such a high priority, it doesn't seem like it's that important. Your feedback can help us make sure that we're tackling the projects that are going to have the most impact. So that concludes my Student Financial Aid Programs report. Anything that I said that you'd like to chit-chat about? I'll take that as we're doing an amazing job.
And you are doing an amazing job, so thank you. I saw Bridget clapping her hands, so yes. Okay, so we're down to the end. But before we adjourn the meeting, are there any items that anyone would like to discuss or any questions that you may have? And I think we still have Kathy. Are you still on the phone? Is that a yes?
Yes. I'm
Okay.
still here.
Okay. So any questions?
I don't. Thank
No.
you.
No? Okay, so our next meeting is on September 6th. And just as a reminder, if you have any future agenda items, please let me know or Chad. And that also applies to those of you that are listening to us this morning. So now I'm ready to ask, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I would
Oh,
make that
Alan?
motion after I say it's a pleasure to have Jonathan with us.
Yes.
And appreciate him being dedicated to come all the way from El Paso to join us. That's quite a little trip. So thank you, Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, so Alan for first, second?
Second.
Delisa, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so none opposed. So the June 7th meeting's adjourned, and I guess we'll see everyone in September. So have safe travels. Thank you.
Safe travels. Thank you. Yeah.